Hello and welcome to another episode of Life Telos as First Principle. Today I want to talk about reason and religion, or we might say logic and God. I'll make the case that despite their differences, they share the same roots, but simply address different adaptive human functions. It might be easy to think that this is just a kind of philosophical indulgence. Does this really matter in the face of so many more pressing crises that we face as a species? I think it does. Culturally, we're living through a time of fractured and often violently competing worldviews. Technological progress has connected us in ways our ancestors could never have imagined. Yet the result has not been unity, but instead an increase of divisions and an amplification of conflict. We're bombarded by information, much of it distorted, partial, or designed to capture our attention and outrage rather than deepen our understanding. The digital commons that promised connection has become a maze of echo chambers and niche tribes where people rarely meet in person. The shared worldviews that once offered cohesion and moral orientation for human cultures across time has splintered into countless competing narratives. How are we to address the many problems and crises that we face when we can't even agree on what is true and what is good? Logic and theism, or science and religion, are among the most basic of these fractures, and each is fragmented within itself. Science is divided into specializations and ideological camps, religion into sectarian conflicts and violence. Even movements that reject religion often recreate its structure. A faith in unexamined assumptions, a moral fervor toward purity, a search for belonging. And scientists, too, now interpret the same data through divergent paradigms, each claiming the mantle of truth. To identify a common ground between logic and theism, then, is not merely a philosophical indulgence. It's a cultural necessity. These are the two great languages through which humanity has sought coherence, one of truth, the other of value and meaning. Their reconciliation could help heal the deeper schisms that run through our civilization. If there exists a ground more fundamental, a principle from which both emerge, then perhaps it can also point toward what unites all of our other divided ways of knowing. Life Telos may be that ground, the recognition that beneath every search for truth and every yearning for meaning and goodness lies the same impulse of life itself, toward coherence, adaptation, and communion. We live in an age that has accumulated vast knowledge and information. We can map the genome, simulate intelligence, and watch galaxies from billions of years ago. But when it comes to meaning, morality, and purpose, we seem less certain than ever. After the death of God, we didn't just lose a supernatural overseer, we lost the shared metaphysical ground that once united reason, morality, and meaning. What rushed in to fill that vacuum were ideological substitutes. Nationalism, Marxism, scientism, consumerism, identity politics, each claiming to offer purpose and direction, and yet each in its own way became a kind of religion, absolutized, intolerant of critique, and ultimately misaligned with life's deeper purposes. Nietzsche saw this coming when he declared God is dead. He wasn't celebrating, he was warning. He understood that when belief in divine order collapses, the moral and metaphysical scaffolding that supported Western civilization collapses with it. He asked, if there is no transcendent source of value, what will take its place? And the 20th century answered with experiments in ideology, from totalitarian politics to market worship, revealing how easily human beings can turn substitute gods into idols of their own making. Reason on its own, once imagined as humanity's great liberator from superstitious beliefs, has drifted far from its roots in life. Cut off from the living world, it became reductionistic. It's brilliant at manipulating matter, but tone deaf to value, meaning, and purpose. We learned how things work, but not what they're for. We can say what is, but for many it's become taboo to speak of what ought to be. And that, I think, is the essence of our modern malaise. A world bursting with information, yet fragmented, in conflict and starving for coherence and moral grounding. For centuries, reason and religion have regarded each other with suspicion, each convinced it guards the one true path to understanding reality. Reason looks at religion and sees irrationality, stories taken literally, miracles demanded as facts, faith used to justify hierarchy and war. It points to the long history of dogma suppressing inquiry and declares that the light of truth must be freed from the shadows of superstition. Religion, in turn, looks at reason and sees coldness, an intellect brilliant at analysis but blind to value. It sees a worldview that can split atoms but can't tell us why we shouldn't use them to destroy each other. It sees the disenchantment of the world. It points to the moral vacuity of a universe described as mechanism and declares that the light of wisdom must be freed from the darkness of meaninglessness. Each side, in its zeal, builds a straw man of the other. Reason defines religion by its most literal and oppressive forms. Religion defines reason by its most reductionist and nihilistic extremes. And both mistake the shadow for the whole. The irony is that their conflict has less to do with substance than with emphasis. Each attends to a different dimension of the same reality. Reason seeks coherence of propositional truth. Religion seeks coherence of value. Both arise from the same human need to orient ourselves in a vast and uncertain world, to know what is real and to know what matters. But because each has come to see the other as an enemy, both have become deformed by the absence of what the other provides. Reason, divorced from reverence, devolves into technocracy and cynicism. Religion, divorced from reason, devolves into dogma and tribalism. Each becomes the caricature of that the other condemns. And so, the great conversation between faith and reason has broken down into mutual accusation, each seeing the other's shadow, but rarely its light. Perhaps it's time to ask whether this opposition itself is false. If both reason and religion arise from life's attempt to understand and orient within itself, then their conflict may be less a clash of enemies than a quarrel between estranged siblings, each carrying something the other has forgotten. They were born of the same family. Reason without reverence becomes clever but hollow. Religion without reason becomes passionate but blind. Maybe what we need is not a victor, but a reunion, a framework deep enough to honor both truth and value, both knowing and caring. Life Telos offers that possibility, a grounding in the living process from which both logic and devotion emerge. It invites us to see that the impulse to understand and the impulse to revere are not opposites, but complementary expressions of the same life-seeking coherence within itself. I should say, I didn't arrive at this view quickly. As a teenager, I read the Bible cover to cover because I'd fallen in love with a Jehovah's Witness girl. For a while, I tried to believe as she did. I went to her church called Kingdom Hall. I also went to a weekly Bible study group. Eventually, I realized that I was never going to swallow it all and become a believer. After 2 years together, one night we sat on the hood of my '64 Chevy Impala in her driveway, the moonlight reflecting off the chrome. She pressed me for a declaration. Was I now a Jehovah's Witness? I took a deep breath. I knew I had a choice between love and truth. This is what spontaneously popped out of my mouth. I told her the only way I'd become a Jehovah's Witness was if I fell on my head and had brain damage. Needless to say, the relationship didn't survive, but somehow my interest in God did, at least for a while. Later, I turned to Buddhism, a non-theist path that seemed cleaner, less encumbered, For decades, I saw no need for God, and yet something in me never quite let go of the intuition that there was more to the story. Further down the line, Ken Wilber's 1, 2, 3 of God, or first, second, and third person perspectives on God, gave me a bridge, a way to think about God without returning to literalism. Wilber is a Buddhist, and he has some time for God, so I thought maybe there's something there. But even his formulation didn't quite satisfy me. It didn't reach into the moral and biological roots of our sense of the sacred. So, when I speak now about unifying reason and religion, I'm not defending an ideology, one way or the other. I'm describing my own lifelong search and where it's led me so far. Now I want to be more specific about the parallels or shared common ground underlying both the belief in logic and the belief in God. There are more, but I've narrowed it down to just 6 because it seems like these are the most important. The first is intelligibility. Both logic and theism rest on a faith that reality makes sense. Logic assumes the intelligibility of being, that reality is structured in ways the mind can apprehend. Theism assumes the intelligibility of value, that goodness and meaning are intrinsic to existence, not mere human inventions. Each begins from trust that reality is not chaos, but coherent order, and that our minds and hearts are evolved to participate in that order. The second parallel I call coherence. Both logic and theism seek coherence, a harmony among parts that allows the whole to make sense. Logic seeks it among propositions, the fit between ideas, the internal order of thought. Theism seeks it among beings and values, the fit between self, others, and the larger whole of existence. Each reflects life's movement toward integration, many elements finding balance within a living unity. Excuse the helicopter or whatever that was. Coherence doesn't ignore difference, it gives difference a place within order, and when that order is experienced, it often evokes a feeling we call beauty. Logic finds beauty in the elegance of truth, when an idea or pattern suddenly fits. Theism finds beauty in the harmony of goodness, when life, value, and meaning feel aligned. Both reveal that coherence is not only understood but felt, its life sensing its own order from within. The third parallel, both have truth orientation. Both logic and theism are oriented toward truth, each seeking fidelity to what is real. Logic pursues correspondence, the alignment of thought with the structures of reality. Theism pursues congruence, the alignment of conduct and value with what sustains life and well-being. Both depend on the confidence that reality is intelligible and trustworthy enough to guide our understanding and our actions. Truth, in this sense, is not merely an idea, but a way of being in right relation with the structure of reality. Parallel number 4. They both have a teleology. By teleology, I mean life's intrinsic orientation towards self-organization, its built-in tendency to move toward greater coherence, vitality, and participation in the whole. If coherence describes the structure of order in space, teleology describes the movement of order through time. Logic and theism both express this directionality. Logic seeks resolution, the completion of understanding, when thought aligns with the pattern of things. Theism seeks attunement, the alignment of behavior with the intrinsic values and moral order through which life sustains and renews itself. Each shows that knowing and valuing are not static achievements but evolving processes through which life continually strives to recognize and express its own deeper order. Parallel number 5. Transcendence and mystery. Both logic and theism eventually reach their limit. For logic, it appears in Gödel's incompleteness, the recognition that no system of reason can fully account for itself, that every framework rests on truths it cannot prove. For theism, it appears as divine mystery, the silence beyond all names, the recognition that every image of God is partial, every doctrine provisional. Each arrives in its own way at humility, the moment when knowledge bows before what exceeds it. For both logic and theism, this is not a failure, but a recognition that limits reveal something essential. Reality is always more than our concepts, and that reverence and curiosity are appropriate responses. Both the logician and the mystic stand before the same horizon. One calls it incompleteness, the other calls it mystery, and both understand that what is most real can be known only in part, and yet appreciated and loved as a whole. Parallel number 6, community and transmission. Neither logic nor theism exists in isolation. Each depends on shared participation to live, evolve, and endure. Logic finds community in dialogue, education, and the collective testing of ideas, the ongoing conversation through which truth refines itself. Theism finds community in ritual and story, the shared practices through which value and meaning are remembered and renewed. Both are living traditions of transmission, carrying life's intelligibility across generations. Through them, the impulse to understand and the impulse to revere are kept alive in culture, ensuring that the knowledge of life remains a shared inheritance rather than a private possession. If we step back from these 6 parallels, a pattern becomes clear. Logic and theism rest on the same foundational faith, that reality is intelligible. Yet they differ in how they relate to that ground of intelligibility. Logic abstracts it, treating it as an impersonal structure, the grammar of being. Theism personifies it, expressing intelligibility and value through idealized human form. The difference arises from the domains they inhabit. Logic speaks to the mind's need for coherence, and theism to the heart's need for meaning and love. And perhaps this is why theism so naturally imagines the source of value as a person, because value, morality, and purpose are lived in personal terms. We might say that humanity was created in the image of God, and that God, in turn, was created in the image of humanity. Our attempt to give form to life's highest alignment with itself. Seen this way, the boundary between reason and reverence begins to dissolve. For me, the choice is not between mythic literalism or mechanistic nihilism. It begins from something simpler, more observable, that life itself strives toward coherence, adaptation, and communion. It's not a belief, it's an empirical reality, visible in everything that lives. When I speak of Life Telos, I mean the recognition that this intrinsic movement of life toward growth and integration is the first principle of value. It's what religion once intuited as the divine, and what science now studies as evolution and complexity. It's the living ground in which both faith and reason are rooted. Reason, in this view, isn't a detached faculty floating above nature. It's a life process, the mind's way of aligning with the patterns of reality. And theism, at its best, is also a life process, the heart's way of aligning with the value of reality. Both are shaped by the same evolutionary intelligence. Our ways of thinking, feeling, and meaning-making still bear the fingerprints of life itself, its drive toward coherence, its capacity for adaptation, and its foundation in recognizable patterns. Life Telos becomes the shared ground where both can meet, the living source that gives rise to truth and goodness alike. When we see it this way, the opposition between faith and reason, as I said, dissolves. Both arise from the same living source, from life's own impulses toward coherence and value. Reason, at its core, is an act of trust, of faith, that the universe is intelligible, that patterns can be known, and that truth matters. Even the decision to reason assumes that reality is ordered enough to be understood. In that sense, reason is a kind of devotion, the mind's form of prayer, its way of aligning with the logic of the living world. A mature theism, at its best, is not a suspension of reason, but its completion. It's an intuitive recognition of the same order that logic describes, only apprehended through the heart. Where reason says the universe is coherent, theism says the universe is good. Both are attempts to align consciousness with a deeper structure of being. Both rest on the same faith that reality is not chaos, but a living field of intelligible relations. When life reaches the level of self-reflective awareness, it expresses this faith in two ways: as reason, which seeks to understand the pattern of reality, and as devotion, which seeks to honor its value. These are not contradictions, but complementary expressions of the same biological movement, life striving to know and align with itself. Logic develops from our need to navigate the world of things, to predict, manipulate, and coordinate. It refines perception into pattern, helping us to act effectively in the physical and social environment. Theism, by contrast, develops from our need to orient within the world of meanings, to sustain emotional and relational coherence in the face of uncertainty, loss, and mortality. Where logic orders facts, theism orders values. Each is a form of knowledge, and both are essential to a life aligned with itself. From a theistic perspective, logic is necessary but not sufficient. It can describe the mechanisms of life, but not why they matter. From a logical perspective, theism seems to overreach, making propositions that cannot be proven. But what logic calls unfounded may nevertheless be functional in their service to life, providing narratives that orient emotion and context, that translate deep biological realities into symbolic form. The problem is not that value, meaning, and purpose are inventions of the human mind, but that we have abstracted them so far from life that they appear detached from it. We analyze them conceptually instead of observing how they operate in living systems. Even a single cell expresses value when it moves toward nourishment and away from harm, purpose when it repairs and reproduces itself, coherence when it sustains its integrity amid flux. These are not metaphors, they are the behavioral grammar of life. Our alienation from this living intelligibility may explain why humans suffer forms of psychological distress unknown to other animals. When we sever meaning from life's movements, we lose our compass. Before I go further, I should acknowledge that none of this emerges from nowhere. The lineage runs deep, from Aristotle's teleology and his conviction that form and purpose are intrinsic to nature, to Spinoza's vision of God and nature as one substance, to Kant's distinction between pure and practical reason, which in many ways maps onto our quest for truth and goodness. Then came C.S. Peirce, Charles Sanders Peirce, who carried these qualities into the modern age. He saw logic not as a static system of deduction, but as a living process, an evolving method of inquiry, grounded in experience. For Peirce, meaning and truth arise within the unfolding of life itself, tested through the consequences of action and the continual revision of our beliefs. Whitehead later reimagined this in process terms, seeing reality itself as a living flow of becoming rather than static being. And in our own era, developmental thinkers from Piaget to Kegan to Bassages, Fisher, and Commons have shown how cognition evolves through successive operations on earlier modes of understanding. I stand on that lineage, but I want to take one more step, to ground these insights not in metaphysical speculation, but in the biology of life itself. So far, I may have implied that logic and reason are the same thing. They aren't. Reasoning uses logic, but it's not limited to it. Logic is a formal tool. Reason is a larger capacity. Logic works with axioms and rules of inference. Reason works with intuitions, emotions, values, and lived experience, as well as logic. Gödel showed that no logical system can fully justify itself. Every formal framework rests on axioms that cannot be proven from within their own system. They are accepted because they seem self-evident. because they work, because they resonate with our intuitions. In that sense, logic is based on a kind of faith, trust in certain basic patterns of thought and reality that we cannot ultimately derive from anything more fundamental. Reason, if it's honest, cannot pretend that only religion relies on intuition and unprovable starting points. It cannot accept the axioms of logic while mocking the axioms of theism as such simply for being axioms. That would be, ironically, illogical. The real question is not whether there are axioms, but whether those axioms are aligned with life. From a Life Telos perspective, as I've said repeatedly, both logic and reason grow out of the same biological ground. The intuitions that make logic possible, the sense of pattern, identity, non-contradiction, cause and effect, are not airborne abstractions. They were shaped by evolution to help organisms navigate a patterned world. Logic serves life because it tracks the regularities of reality well enough for beings like us to survive and coordinate. The same is true, in a different register, for theism. The intuitions behind God language, the sense of moral order, ultimate accountability, shared purpose, and sacred value, also arise from evolutionary pressures, the need for trust, cohesion, and long-term cooperation in groups. Theism serves life when it encodes and amplifies those patterns of value and belonging. In this light, reason makes use of both logic and theism. It is life's reflective capacity to work with both, to use logic to clarify truth and theism or symbolic spirituality to orient value and meaning. Reason is not the enemy of religion, nor the servant of logic alone. Reason is the name we give to life's attempt to integrate all its ways of knowing, sensory, emotional, relational, symbolic, into a more coherent alignment with itself. This is how I now think about metaphysics. Not as a separate otherworldly realm we somehow reach into, but meta in a developmental sense. Ways of thinking that emerge from and operate on earlier modes of apprehension, from sensory motor experience to concrete operations to formal reasoning and beyond. Our metaphysical pictures of reality grow out of the nervous system of a living animal. They are rooted in biology, even when they speak in the language of spirit. When logic or theism forget this, when they drift away from their roots in Life Telos, they become pathological. Logic becomes reductionistic and inhuman. Theism becomes rigid and inhumane. Both lose sight of the fact that they were born to serve life, to help us transcend and include our instincts, expanding the range of possible actions that support the survival and flourishing of living beings. We often imagine logic as the antidote to faith, but at its foundation it also rests on faith, on intuition. Every axiom, every law of thought is accepted not because it can prove itself, but because we sense its rightness. Gödel showed that no formal system can justify its own truth, as I mentioned. Some propositions must simply be assumed. The deeper truth is that both logic and theism arise from the same biological soil. The intuitions that make reason possible were shaped by evolution for one purpose, to serve life's adaptation and coherence. Logic endures because it works. It helps living beings navigate reality successfully. To believe that reason somehow floats free of nature, untouched by the life that produced it, is itself a superstition, an article of faith dressed in secular clothes. When I perceive the intelligibility of life, not just as an observer standing apart, but experience it as a participant made of the same intelligible fabric, I don't hesitate to use words like sacred, divine, or even God. What I'm naming is not a mythological being, but the felt recognition of belonging to a self-organizing, self-knowing reality. And yet, I'm aware how easily such language is misconstrued in our culture. To speak of God is often to be taken as a retreat into myth. Perhaps that's why Jordan Peterson hesitates when asked if he believes in God, or why Carl Jung said he doesn't believe in God, he knows God. I think they must sense what I'm trying to describe, that the sacred is not something outside of life, but the quality of life experienced from within and through its own intelligibility. Perhaps the next stage of human evolution is not to believe again in God, but to awaken to the sacredness of life itself as the ground where faith and reason finally meet. Because life, not ideology, not dogma, not nihilism, is the one thing we all share. It gives rise to every question, every discovery, every act of love, and every search for truth. Maybe the death of God was clearing the way for a deeper, more mature reference, not for a being above life, but for life itself. Well, that's all for now. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you next time. Until then, take care of yourself and each other. Bye for now.